very good morning to you. My name is Nick Jones of Alpha Dog Behaviour. I am the pet behaviourist working alongside Petplan today to answer your behaviour questions. And just a quick introduction, I have Max here, he's my wire-haired Vizsla, and little Pip. Yep, she can't be bothered to move, but she may well make a little appearance throughout today as well. So, Steph, I gather you have some questions for me. Fire away.
Yeah, let's jump straight in. So, Jeanette Dobbs asks, our Yorkie doesn't stop barking and there is a footpath outside our house. Can you help?
Yes, so very good question, because barking in the garden, as you can imagine, is pretty common. One of the first and key things we need to do with barking in the garden is to not just leave the dog out there, because if it's there unattended, how can you have any influence on its behaviour? So the first key point is to avoid leaving the dog in the garden where it can practice behaviours that you don't want it to do. So for things like toilet breaks, just go out with the dog, potentially put the dog on the lead if it is that quick to go into the barking mode, give it the toilet break, reward the dog, and then come straight back in. So that helps manage the situation a bit better, and it will, by its nature, reduce that to a large extent straight away. Then we can look at doing more positive behavioural based things to actually teach the dog to be calmer and less reactive in that environment. So on the assumption, because most dogs are food driven, but on the assumption your dog is food driven, take out a nice pile of really high value food with your dog, place your dog on the lead. Incidentally, don't let your dog rush out of the house. Try to have a calm exit of the home, because that can also play into how charged up the dog is once it goes into the garden. And then try to sit with your dog. So you could be sitting on a comfortable chair and your dog is at your feet, paying attention to you, just like Max is looking at me. And that I could be feeding the dog, rewarding him, and keeping the dog's attention. So this is in essence distraction-based training, and that sort of simple approach can apply and work with many different behaviours that the dog may be reactive to. So that's the top and bottom there. Calm exits on the lead, lots of food to have short sessions whereby you can positively distract the dog, and also not to leave the dog out there unattended. Thank you for the question.
Great. Next question from Lucy Todd says, my 10-year-old Labrador Retriever Alfie is generally well behaved, but if I take him out and he sees a cat, his instinct kicks in and he pulls on the lead. I used to be able to control him, but I'm now frightened he might run off and get run over. Please could you advise me how to help control?
Okay, so when it's difficult, isn't it, when we're into the realms of actual physical dynamics, where you've got a strong strapping dog, as Labradors often are, and then if you are quite light in yourself, that can make it quite difficult to physically manage the dog. So equipment can make a difference, because if your dog does make a dash, which is happening at the moment, you do need to be confident that you can physically control the dog. So consider some varieties of anti-pull body harnesses or head harnesses. There are lots on the market. If you go into a good pet store and seek some further advice, that would be able to address that for you. Now, many Labradors... Oh, don't put your foot on your dog's tail. That's lesson number 1. Sorry, Max. So the key thing with the Labradors is that they are often very food driven. So food, you will probably notice, tends to be a bit of a central motivation in my work, because if we can distract and get the dog practicing a different behaviour using food, that's good. So it's important that you're proactive on your dog walks. You have a means of managing the dog in advance of the behaviour happening, so head, body harnesses. Get the dog to work for more of his daily food allowance. So that may mean, if you're going out in the morning, to practice sitting your dog down, him looking at you, paying attention to you, and this will put you in a position so that you'll be better placed to do that when a cat appears, because of course you can't entirely predict them. So there is some sort of uncertainty as to when the cat will appear. So as soon as the cat appears, you need to drop in the sit, the stay. If the dog won't sit, I wouldn't stress too much about it as long as he's standing still. And then to feed him so that he's paying attention to you. But we definitely need to have the physical control in place. So that is something that you could consider. Okay, Steph, so I hope that covers that for you.
So a cat question now from Frances Bateman. She says, how do I stop my youngest cat from trying to drive my older cat out of the house by attacking him? I have tried the plug-in remedy and it does not work. Please help.
Okay, so thank you for that. Cats fighting in the home, it's a case as lots of dog behaviours actually looking at what I often term as a layered type approach, so that the solution doesn't really lie in just one area. It really is likely to be a matter of coming together with half a dozen potentially little tweaks and changes to make the difference. By the way, that Fallaway products also, I believe, now come in collar based, and which I like, because if there is a product around the the cat's neck, then that will radiate around the cat whilst it's sleeping, and sometimes using plug-in diffusers can be difficult to actually hit the right amount of density, if that's the best word, given the layout of your home. So little bullet points for you to think about here rather than going into great detail. Make sure that both cats are able to have their own private spaces so that they don't feel pressed in against each other. Set up quiet private corners, maybe more beds than you have cats. So if you had something like 4 little beds in different areas, there are, as you know, covered over cat beds, things of that nature, which may help. Also with cats, we really want to lean towards the positive reinforcement, because their emotionality tends to be a bit more delicate than your average dog. So we are looking at creating calm, positive time with the cats together. So consider bringing them into the same room with each other, but then also to have some really interesting toys around that you know they enjoy, maybe something like catnip if you happen to know they enjoy that, and some high value food. So something like that you would hold a little bowl of really small chicken pieces, or some sort of cat treat that you know they're really into, that you can reward. You can use those things to reward calm behaviour, and it distracts them and brings them into a calmer environment together. So again, as with any question, it's easy for me to spend a good couple of hours addressing these things in detail, so forgive me for keeping it quite short, but those are the sort of primary things I would look at. Lots of escape avenues for both cats so they can be calm and quiet, bringing them together so that you can control that event a little more, using things such as catnip, food, toys, little twitchy toys, so that they're coming away from those little 30-60 minute sessions thinking, actually, when we're together, that's quite fun. So that's the way I would work that sort of situation forward.
Fab. Question from Caroline Murphy now.
Mm-hmm.
My 2.5-year-old Shih Tzu Cross Charlie has IBS and is supposed to take vet recommended dried food. Ever since we've got him 2 years ago, he's been very fussy over food. One day he loves something and for the next few weeks he won't touch it. I'm having terrible trouble getting him to eat his food. She's tried everything and she really wants to get him into a regular eating pattern. Do you have any advice?
Yes, okay, so thankfully Max and Pip are gannets and will enjoy and eat pretty much anything, and so you tend to find that dogs range in their desire to eat food from where you have a dog that will eat pretty much any brand without any complaints, and then we can go to the other end of the scale whereby the dog is very, very fussy and picky about what's available to it. And of course, I fully understand we all want to see our dogs enjoy their food, and so we would naturally try different foods so that we find one that the dog is happy with. The bottom line with this, and it's not the most satisfactory thing for you to hear, I think, is that you can't make, in my experience, a fussy eater into a dog that will love every food. One thing, and I think recognising that is important, because that can help take pressure off yourself as well. and not to maybe worry so much about it. I know you say that the dog won't starve himself. Well, that is true, but we still want the dog to eat with some enthusiasm. It might be worth you discussing this with your vet, incidentally, just to ensure that you have covered all your bases and not just trying to plough through it on your own. So when there's something a bit more important going on, such as the dog's nutritional element, then making sure you've looked at any possible medical reasonings is really important. I often find that fussy eaters will enjoy one of the wet, or what I call moist foods on the market. They tend to come in packs or trays where you can peel the top off, and that tends to come out like a firm pate. There's a couple of brands on the market in particular which are free from any additives, and that you know that you're feeding your dog a good quality food, and that hopefully the dog would enjoy that. Finally, just be careful that you're not, what's the best word, pandering to that behaviour too much, and maybe getting into hand feeding or kneeling down, trying to encourage the dog to eat. I would be a bit more straightforward about it. Put the food down, give the dog, let's say if you put the food down at 6 p.m, I would leave it down as a window for the dog to eat until, let's say, 6:15. Lift the food up after that, and then it's next presented its meal in the morning, if you follow me. So it can help begin to train the dog to understand that there's a window, once in the morning, once in the evening, assuming you feed in that fashion, as most people do, and that can help train the dog to gain some regulation over its hunger. Okay, so good luck with that.
Question from David Scott. He asks, how do I stop my Jack Russell from snapping at me and from barking all the time, even at a phone ringing or the TV?
Okay, well that sounds like a good 3-hour consultation right there. It's a case of looking at what the triggers are and coming back to basics, and maybe sit down with a pen and a paper and to work out what the triggers are. I would say, just to be fair to you and me, in the sense of giving you really solid answers, this does sound like the sort of thing that you may need to say, hey, I need some proper help, and to come away and to seek the help of a qualified behaviourist. So that's something that you may need to acknowledge at some point. If a dog is showing you aggression in the home, I am not averse to putting a muzzle on the dog. We need to introduce the muzzle gradually in a positive way so that the dog isn't stressed about it, but you need to demonstrate to the dog that it can't and shouldn't do that to you, because if it's doing it to you, I would suggest it would be doing it, or could be doing it, to others as well. And then if your dog's biting people in public, or indeed even people into your own home, we then have the Dangerous Dogs Act floating around, which we don't want to get involved with. So muzzling is definitely an area that I would encourage you to look at. Teaching your dog to be calm, because it sounds like he's being reactive over a number of different areas, could be something you look at. So I would be interested as to what you're feeding your dog. Sometimes poor ingredients in dog food can affect behaviour, and this all needs to be broken down so that you can build the whole thing back up again. And I think that really leads me on to this idea of you seeking further professional help. Okay, so I'm sorry that isn't really very in depth, but I hope it gives you some thoughts and pointers.
Fab. Question now from Kelly Howard. My pug has started fighting with his best friend. His friend is very silent and goes really still after he does this. My pug then goes berserk. Is there anything they can do to avoid them getting seriously hurt?
And does she say whether they're both in the same home, those dogs?
No, it's her friend.
Her friend, yes. Okay, now interestingly, I had a visit very recently that was quite like this, where there were a few dogs in the home, and then a couple of other dogs came in on a irregular basis, and all hell let loose basically. They were all fighting each other. But we need to ensure that we have control. So some of the things that you could do to help improve that. Why not meet them in neutral territory away from the home, say something like a park. Use flexi leads or long training lines. I suggest a flexi lead because they're quite small and presumably fairly manageable. Let them spend some positive time together in a neutral environment where they can move around. The trouble is when we get dogs to meet each other or almost put them in this situation in a home, it can be a bit stressful, and the dogs don't really have that ability to move away and to diffuse something. So meet in a neutral area. 30 odd minute walk would be nice, and then hopefully you can walk back together into the home. Let the resident dog go in first. Make sure you're not getting squeezed into little areas like hallways with, you know, 2 people, 2 dog leads, 2 dogs. That's where I find we can have some problems. So try to keep space. Maybe one person goes and sits on the sofa at one end of the room and the other person sits on a chair at the other end, and you keep them on their leads and you manage them carefully so that they're not free to do whatever they like. Another good method is that you could, if you need to let go of the leads and to say make a drink or go to the bathroom, you could quickly place the lead around the foot of a sofa, something of that nature, and that you can place a bed there for the dog so that they both have something something comforting and warm, and they can lie down, but it means that you don't have to hold the lead so much. That is the essence of what I would be guiding you to do. If you found that once they're sitting with you, you could give them a little stuffed toy with some food in it, some soft food that they could work on. So again, it builds up something which is calm and controlled. You are guiding the calmness and the controlled environment because at the moment, clearly, they can't be left to their own devices. So come back to basics. Gradual, gentle introductions, and then you can extend the time of the 2 dogs being together. I think just the sheer fact that you have intervened and stopped the possibility for that fighting in itself is a big deal, because that's number 1 point. That needs to stop first, and that will be your role, and then we can build that up. Okay, so good luck with that, but just be careful.
So Debbie Webb's actually got a cat question, but it sounds like it's associated behaviour. So
yeah.
She asks, my cat is on a diet and as a result he pulls his fur out like a protest. Any idea how to break the cycle? My vet has confirmed it's linked. If we up his food, he doesn't fur pull, but if he does, if he doesn't get food, he goes bald. Any advice on how to break the habit?
Okay, so but the cat's actually on a diet?
Yes.
That's so difficult, isn't it? Because it does suggest, from what you're saying, that the cat gets stressed when it is on restricted calories. The cat is hungry, and as a result, it is getting into that, picking at its own fur. A slightly unconventional approach, is if your vet was in agreement, is to maybe consider something like a cat collar to stop the cat from turning around and picking at his own coat so much, and that's the sort of thing that I would be inclined to do. Again, it's a sort of behaviour that if you're not present, you can't do anything about it, but that's where the cat collar could come in. You may also benefit, if you haven't looked at it already, which is the Feliway products, which do seem to get a lot of good feedback. So a difficult one, that. Make sure you continue to talk to your vet, and again, that is something that you're already doing, but make sure your vet is kept in the picture fully. But good luck.
A question now from Lisa Tomlinson. She asks, my miniature Yorkie has got a temper problem. She started growling and snapping at me and my partner for no reason. If she is sat on our knee and we dare to move, she snaps at us. She snapped my fingers a few times, the teeth come out and she growls. Otherwise, she's a very happy dog. What's going wrong?
The word privileges comes to mind. Now, we all have dogs, myself included, so that we can love them and enjoy them. But if a dog begins to, how can you put it in simple English, abuse those privileges, and the privilege in this instance that you've described is that the dog is up on the sofa with you. Now, I allow my dogs on the sofa, but only with my permission, and they are also, I know that they will get off, as I say, off and point to the floor when I ask them to do so. And that's been done from day one with both of them from puppies, so they understand that rule. If a dog begins to show poor behaviour when it's having that privilege, i.e. access to you on the sofa, then I would block that privilege for a period of time. Usually I would say, look, for a 3-month period, we'll bring the dog off the sofa. Yes, that is a sacrifice to you, it's something you'll miss, but actually you can't have your cake and eat it. You know, you've got on one hand the dog you enjoying the experience with the dog, but on the other hand the dog's biting you. So let's bring the dog off the sofa. It's not a punishment in doing that, but it is a bit of an effort to reset things. So bring the dog onto its own soft bed on the floor. It's meant to be warm and dry and comfortable, and that's the way I would do that. If I was with you, I would ask you a host of questions, because I know that very often the behaviour is occurring in other areas as well. So, but if you take the gist of that thought about removing that privilege for a period of time to the sofa, and you may be able to apply it to other areas as well, such as, is the dog sleeping on the bed with you? Again, it's something I'm not inherently against, but if the dog is aggressive towards you on the bed, we need to bring the dog off the bed, potentially either so that it can't get up, it possibly needs you to lift the dog up anyway, and that you create the bed on the floor, and indeed even potentially out on the landing. You could put a baby gate on your bedroom door and just sort of push the dog back in that fashion. So just a few thoughts for you there, but at least that will begin to address it in a fairly direct manner. Okay, I hope that helps.
Samantha Jordake asks, my 6-month-old Cocker Spaniel puppy picks up every piece of litter and anything else he can get hold of when out on his walk. Any advice on how to stop him doing it?
Okay, and it was a cocker, was it?
It is a Cocker Spaniel, yeah.
So spaniels love to hold things, and the thing I often find with spaniels as well is that they can be possessive over items. It just seems to be a trait of the spaniel breeds, and even things like cockapoos, and they can be quite possessive as well. It's important because it is often overlooked to teach a dog the hold and give exercise. And if you search around, you can find information on the web on how to teach that. It won't help you very much today, but if you set upon a little training program over the coming weeks, you will then be able to teach your dog to the point where it understands the give or the drop command. And that's something that you really need to do. We don't have the time or the ability to go into that here today, but that's something I would encourage you to do. It would also benefit you and your dog to teach the leave it command, which is it's like the third one, isn't it? We've got the hold it and then the give, but then in the middle, the leave it command would say, but just don't touch it in the first place. So I remember with one of my first dogs, I used to purposefully drop little items as I would walk, and then I'd walk away and I'd come back and I know that little bit of tissue would be there on the pavement or the path, and so I could work that area of behaviour in a proactive fashion. So as we approached the tissue on the floor, I would be saying to the dog, leave it. I could also be distracting the dog with some food or maybe a squeaky toy, so that we know really the dog knows it's there, but the dog is paying attention to me. So the hold and give command, the leave it command, which can also be done just sitting in a kitchen with a bit of food on the floor, and you just showing the dog a nice flat hand with a fairly flat tone of voice saying leave it, and then you could be take it then. Okay, so the dog begins to understand things that it can and can't have, and indeed if it does get something, you feel that you've got a bit more confidence getting it off of the dog in the first place. So good luck with that. It's not easy, but work on it, and it's definitely something that can resolve.
So another similar question to one we've already answered, but it doesn't hurt doing it again. Mm-hmm. So Belle Hoochin asks, my dog Monty barks at everything that goes past the window. They need to keep barking noise down because of where they live. can we help? He's a Westie Cross.
Westie Cross, I can see him now sitting in the window, running up and down. What a dog can't see, it can't bark at. Although some people would argue, well, yes, they can hear things and they'll still bark. Yes, that's true. But if we take away the initial reason of the barking, which is most likely to be in the first instance a visual stimulus, then we'll probably find, or you will probably find, that the barking could go down from a 100% problem down to something like a 20% problem in no time at all. So that's something, that's the basic concept. Now, if the dog is sitting on the top of a sofa, looking out the window, then could the sofa be brought away? Some dogs, it's not always that easy, I realise. You know, some people say, well, no, I can't, you know, there's nowhere else to put the sofa. The house is quite small, or something of that nature. I have found if you put some wide turkey foil on the bottom of the seat where the dog potentially uses that to jump up, that can act as quite a discouragement, okay? So that might help as well. And when you're home, of course, you will need to make sure that you're managing the dog. Maybe keeping a lead on the dog when you're home will allow you to stand on the lead, stop the dog from jumping up in the first place. Another very reliable method is that you put some opaque window film on the, say, lower half of the window, because you've got a fairly small dog there, and that would allow the light to come in, but it would prevent your dog from having a clear view. You could still see shadows outside, so I would employ the both, really, this concept of preventing him getting up there in the first place, and then also obscuring the view. So opaque window film I really like. After something like a 3-month period of you feeling that the dog is substantially calmer and quieter, then you can gradually remove that film so that you go back to a clear window, which is of course what we all want. But that's a couple of approaches I would use there, so good luck with that.
Fab. A question from Julie Ryder. So Foxy is a 2-year-old. I've had him for 7 months, and I also have a 4-year-old Jack Russell who is best friends with. When they're out walking and they play together, they're fine, but in the house the Jack Russell keeps attacking Foxy for no reason. How do I get him to stop?
Okay, so firstly, it's great that they walk together without any problems, but it's interesting, isn't it, when you then come back into the home where the distractions are much fewer and the owner is likely to be present as well. And you may find, again, it's the sort of thing that I really need to drill down to get some more questions and answers, but it could be a case of resource guarding. Now, dogs can resource guard pretty much anything, and to give you some ideas, that would range from a food bowl, the food itself, a chew, a bone, a toy, the owner, or even locations, but the owner here could be the big one. So because some dogs literally get jealous of that interaction that the owner is giving. So we're getting into a sort of territory where we need to be a bit more thoughtful about how we're interacting with the dogs. I often will find in situations like this that by cooling things down from the owner to the dog in the sense of how much attention and affection you're giving them both can help the dogs be more settled. Because, again, forgive me, I can't ask you the question, but you may well find, because I often encounter this, that there is too much sort of fuss and talking and looking at the dogs being given in the house, and I would be inclined to say, just relax that down, let the dogs settle more, ignore the dogs a little more, and so that they can just focus on relaxing in the home. So that might be something for you to think about. If the dogs can be left together when you're not present, but you are confident they're not fighting, the key element is you're not there. And so again, that confirms, just this is more of a question for you, but this confirms very clearly that it's your presence which the dogs are becoming conflictual over. And then if that's the case, we need again to look at how much attention and interaction we have with the dogs. On a managerial level, very quickly, you may well benefit from muzzling either one or both of the dogs, depending on which of the sort of power is going to between the two dogs. keeping, as I've touched on already today, keeping both dogs on the lead in the house when you're present. Just a quick word, I don't mean to state the obvious, but anything like a muzzle or a lead on the dogs should of course be removed when you go out. If, as another by the way, you feel that the dogs can't be trusted in your absence and you have some reason to think that they are aggressive in your absence, then of course they need to be separated. Okay, and yet another thought, if you think that any of this behaviour is what, for any behaviour with any dog, what you might call a sudden onset behaviour, something that's a bit out of character with the dog, then you need to get to the vets to check for any other symptoms. There could be any sort of pain in the background, there could be some sort of psychological issues that need to be addressed more on a veterinary level. So again, good luck with that, but safety, management, building up positive experiences with the dogs together is invariably the way forward.
Fab. A question from Grace Cox. My dog Bailey barks randomly, especially when letting him outside to go to the toilet, and it's becoming very annoying. Apparently you've met Bailey before.
I have, and I know Grace. Lovely to have a question from you. I met young Bailey only last week. I might have been in a pub, I'm not sure. So now, barking in the garden is a very common thing, and the key thing is to not allow the dog to burst out of the door that goes into the garden and then to be very vocal. If you just stand there and let the dog out and the dog reliably barks, it will happen forever because you're not inserting yourself as a part of what needs to be done. You need to be there so that you can manage the behaviour. So again, as you can probably tell, using things like dog leads is a very effective way. So for toilet breaks, I would encourage, and this is where you will have some time really and effort on your part to help produce that behaviour. So you'll need to take Bailey out on a lead, let him do his business, and then reward him and bring him straight back in. If, as I don't mean to be repeat myself too much, but if again you just let him out and you open the door and say, go on, do your thing, and he goes out barking and then continues to bark, you're not really going to get ahead of it. So that's the simple point I would make there. Manage him more, and that's where you'll find the solution. So lovely to hear from you, Grace. Thank you.
Great. A question from Christine Williams. She says, hi Nick, my dog Ben is a Welsh Border Collie. He is good most of the time, but he is very nervous with other people. There is only one person who will go up and let them stroke him when they are out. He runs off the leads, round the fields, local woods, and he never strays, and his recall is excellent. But whenever they are faced with another walker with a dog, Ben will run off into the wood and take a wider detour to avoid them. He's good with other dogs, but he doesn't like to greet them. He's alright with calmer dogs though, and he doesn't want to approach people no matter how friendly they are. He is 4 years old and always been the same. Can we help?
Okay. You know, I was talking earlier about how some dogs are very food driven and some dogs in their nature are very picky. And with dogs, as their temperaments, just as human, some people can be much more outgoing than others. And I think what I'm trying to say here is that we have to recognise some basic elements of the dog's character. And that trait in your dog, Christine, is likely to continue there into the future, but it's not to say that we can't ensure we're managing him fully so things are safe. It's always excellent that when you have a good recall, because in theory, if you have a superb recall, even if you see that the dog is having to do, you see him off at a distance and he's getting a bit concerned, then if that recall really is good, and you're confident that he's not going to become aggressive in any particular scenario, then you could virtually continue to manage it in that fashion. It's not entirely satisfactory, but it is a way of dealing with it. The other thing to say is, and you haven't suggested that you are trying to do so, but we can't make a dog become friends with somebody. In my work, it's often a case of having to just simply interact with the owner because I'm only there for a few hours. I can't make the dog be friends with me. So If we have members of the family and friends coming to the house, then you might have something that you could potentially build on over time. But try not to force it. If anything, I encourage people to ignore, to become completely non-pressurized towards the dog. If and when the dog makes some advances towards that person, which is more likely when you ignore them, by the way, then we can reward those advances. If the dog's food driven, then maybe feed the dog, drop some food to the floor, or maybe a toy, something of that nature. So to summarise, provided you're confident that the dog could not become aggressive in public, then rely on that recall. If you feel at times a bit panicky that the dog is out of your immediate control, then I would be coming back and looking at some long line training. And I often favour something like a 30-50 foot line, potentially longer, depending on the environment. Make sure you're not sort of taking a dog on a long line into the woods, for example. It would be a bit of a disaster. So I think those are my thoughts on that one. So just make sure you have got the control, that the dog is safe, because sometimes an anxious dog can make decisions or do things which are not desirable, okay, and we need to avoid that. So good luck.
So a question from a number of people, including Lynn Griffin, around dogs jumping up at people and how to stop dogs jumping up.
Good. So jumping up is quite a broad subject, because some dogs will only jump in certain circumstances, but I'll just make some general comments on the subject. So with my own dogs, I teach them, I've had them both from puppies, but of course even if you have a slightly older rescue dog, if a dog is coming up towards me, before I put my hands on the dog, I will ask that dog to sit. And my hands won't, because they want me to touch them, okay? So this is something that can start at home, because if the dog is jumping up on you in the home, then they are almost certainly going to jump up on people in public. So we need to sort of come back to the roots, and most dogs spend, give or take, in the waking day, 90% of their time in the home, okay? So the golden rule is sit equals hello, rather than the dog standing or maybe jumping up. If the dog goes to jump up on you when it's coming towards you, then quickly turn away, and you could make some sort of negative sound like ah or off, okay, so the dog thinks, oh, I shouldn't maybe be doing that. But we're not being heavy-handed with the dog, but we are trying to give the dog a signal that, no, you shouldn't be jumping up. Once the dog, just wait there, try to see out of your peripheral vision what the dog's doing, because if you're patient and if you wait for it, the dog will sit. As soon as the dog sits, oh, good boy, try not to be overexcitable, because if you're like, oh, good boy, he will jump again. So we need to manage the dog's emotions, okay? So that's one scenario. That's probably the foundation. Sit equals hello in the home, by the way, with all members of family. If you're already home and say hubby is coming home and that you know the dog will be inclined to jump up on hubby, husband should ignore the dog as he comes into the home. You could place the dog on a lead so you can at least physically control his behaviour, and you can begin to build up that type of scenario. Once the dog is sufficiently calm, say 5 or 10 minutes, then we could consider the greeting. In public, what we're really doing is the same version. If you have a dog running 50 metres away from you and jumping up at people at a distance, well, of course, you're not in a position to address the behaviour, and that's what you need to do. You need to put yourself in a position so you can address the behaviour, and I actually would come back to a long line. Let's assume we have our dog on this long training line, we see somebody at a distance, then we could do what I would call a controlled walk up. So you might do a little recall, the long line will be trailing behind you, and then you can just casually walk up to people. You're then there in the bubble, as I call it, between you, the other person, and your dog, and you can ensure that your dog is sitting, and you can explain briefly to this other person that you're doing a bit of retraining, and that once the dog is sitting, then you can say to the person, there you go, you can give them a bit of food now, something of that nature. So in the home, in public, those tend to be, you know, in and out of the home. Those two are the two main areas that you would look at. But you have to be present to be able to manage the behaviour, especially out of the home.
Fab. We've got a question from Anna Khan and also Elizabeth Rivera, which are quite similar. So Anna says, my dog Phoebe barks at anyone with a high visibility jacket on and goes into panic mode. She's a rescue dog, so therefore she thinks there might be something in her past which has triggered this. And obviously Elizabeth has the same question, but hers is on is generally towards the postman or anyone wearing a red or orange jacket.
Okay, so high visibility jackets and the problems around it are not uncommon. Dogs are, to a large extent, colourblind, but they can still discern certain colours, and I would, not being able to know exactly how it appears to a dog, but it's clear that they have something there that within that colour range which they find you know, difficult to cope with. A slightly left field thought is that you actually try to get hold of some visibility, high visibility clothing, and that you spend some time with the dog desensitizing it in a more controlled environment. Now that could either be, and these are thoughts for you to consider rather than this being a definitive approach, but if you were to wear that high visibility clothing and then to spend some time with the dog, then naturally, because the dog knows you, it would gradually erode, as I often say, that sort of anxiety towards the colour set itself. Then once you think that's been largely addressed, you could ask a friend to come to the property. The nice thing is that you would be expecting them. You could have your dog on a lead. You could try some good old-fashioned distraction training using food, and just to sort of organically go with the flow on that and to see how well your dog settles down. At least on that sort of method, you're able to control the situation proactively. Now you've got a double whammy really with postmen wearing high vis, because they come pretty reliably every day. They clatter the letterbox, something lands on the doormat, and the dog barks and the postman goes away. So every day they think they're doing a fantastic job. And it may not be so much a case of the high visibility, but maybe more the postman. So this is something for you to think about. Some people want their dogs to bark, but not to bark too much. So we can get into some difficult parameters in terms of, well, how much do we let a dog do a certain behaviour? But if you wanted the dogs to be all but pretty quiet, then if your postie was willing and if you were there enough times to address it, then you could, provided you feel it's safe, have some sort of positive, more calm interactions with the postman. So maybe a little pot of treats near the door and a lead near the door. So the postman arrives, lead on the dog, grab a treat, see if the postman can either just toss that treat to the dog, and you can build things up from there. So like any problem that you wish to overcome, it's a case of thinking where you are now, where you want to be later on, and the little individual chain links that allows you, or steps up the ladder that allows you to overcome that problem. As with many behaviours, it's a case of doing it gradually over a matter of weeks and months. So be prepared to spend some genuine time on it rather than looking for a very quick fix.
A question now from Eleanor Chapman, who asks, she's got a 14-month-old Cocker Spaniel named Poppy. The problem is that she won't stop chewing wood floor tiles or anything that she can get her paws on. She's on a well-balanced diet and has regular exercise, and she's at a total loss as to what to do. Can we help?
And how old was the dog?
14 months.
So a 14-month-old dog is still pretty young. I wonder whether because dogs will chew for a variety of reasons. Young dogs, of course, chew because they are still bedding in teeth. 14 months, obviously your dog's going to have its full set of adult teeth. It could simply be a habit that has not quite been addressed and that it enjoys the wooden floor. I could almost imagine like what type of floor did it say it was? Sorry.
Wooden floor tiles.
Yeah, wooden floor tiles. You know, some dogs just like chewing wood, and if it has a penchant for doing that, then you might be simply struggling with that as a habit. So if that's the case, I certainly, if at all possible, would block access into that area when you're not there to supervise or manage. So it might be a case of simply putting a baby gate in place, maybe restricting the dog into the kitchen area. I usually find that if you're not at home, I would hope that the dog is sleeping and chilling out, you know, and to do that a dog just needs a relatively small space. Okay. It may also be an element of separation anxiety. Maybe there is some barking and whining and upset in your absence. That could be monitored by using a recording app on a smartphone or a tablet. You might want to consider plugging that into a power source, and that when you come home you can review either video or just audio only. Another little trick which I quite like with modern technology is that you can get webcams that are connected to your Wi-Fi in the property, and that you can access that footage from a remote position. So if you're at work, you could see, obviously you'll need to set the camera up into a certain view. You could probably do more than one camera. And that would allow you to have some insight as to how the dog is. Because if you, for example, come to the conclusion that the dog is anxious in your absence, then we have the subject of separation anxiety, and then we can look at ways of addressing that behaviour as well. But certainly try to block access in the area so it just can't be done. See also if, depending on how long the dog is left, if rather than to chew on your wood tiles, that you could provide some empty rubber devices that you could stuff with food, and so that you are able to get your dog doing something a little bit more positive, and it's actually taking its food. Try to direct the dog's food allowance through those devices when you go out, and I have no problem with you putting down not just one but 2 or 3, so that the dog actually has some real work to do. And you can also freeze them, so if you think that would work, you'll need to experiment a little. But if you can get your dog to do something else instead, then that you may find your solution is there. Thank you for that question.
A question from Linda Lowe, who says, I have a Jack Russell who's 3 years old and is still urinating in the house. Can you help, please?
Doesn't say whether it's a boy or a girl.
No, it doesn't.
No. Possible reasons for that are separation anxiety. Dogs will do a number of different things when they're anxious, but inappropriate toileting is certainly one of them. It could be marking in the home, and if it's that, you then have most likely a male, unneutered, that is repeatedly marking over a certain spot. So that if that were happening, I would discuss it in combination with your vet and an experienced behaviour specialist. But castration, if he's not castrated, there's a very good chance. I think the statistics are something like you would expect a 70% reduction in that behaviour. Make sure that the areas which are being, if it is marking, or it doesn't matter really whether it's marking or whether he's just peeing all over the place, that you are cleaning it up thoroughly. There are some products on the market which allow you to really remove all of the scents and the elements of dog urine, so that it gets rid of this sense of overmarking on a constant basis. If the dog is being left for sensible periods of time, let's say a couple of hours, then you could reintroduce, if the dog was in a crate previously, you could crate the dog again for say 3-4 months, and then when you're out, and then you could, after that period, begin to give again access and freedom around the house to see what the dog's doing. But it's usually, as I say, dogs will urinate in the house for a number of reasons, either anxiety or some sense of, this is my job, I need to make this territory mine, especially if maybe you've had other dogs coming into the home where it might be upsetting the dog's sense of property and what it needs to do. So just a few thoughts for you there. Thank you.
So Hazel Price asks, I have a 15-month Labradoodle who is really excitable. He hates being left and the sprays and plugins do not work. I've tried leaving him for short spells, but still no improvement. He also goes from 0 to 100 in excitement levels when visitors arrive. He has had all the training as a youngster and was doing really well until the separation anxiety started around 7 months ago. Any help is appreciated.
Okay, and incidentally, folks, I should have asked you earlier, but there is a share button on your screen. If you would be kind enough to share the video, that would be excellent. Thank you. Okay, so separation anxiety, usually I would, without too much difficulty, expect to spend a good 3 or 4 hours with somebody on an initial consultation. So I think, again, we just have to, very happy to get into this, but I have to appreciate how much we can get into it. Let me give you some little bullet points that are sit in my mind with regards to separation anxiety, such as, in no particular order, homecomings, your homecomings, ignore the dog fully until he's calm. Once he's calm, then you can call him over. He must be sitting, hold the collar if necessary, and then to have a nice calm interaction with the dog. Equally, when you leave the home, just go. Don't fuss him up, don't coochie-coo him or tell him you'll be back later. Just be very matter of fact about it. Practicing little key things such as picking up your keys, your phone, your jacket, seeing what reactions there are on your dog, ignoring him entirely, can help desensitize a little. The more you do it without actually going out can erode his anxiety about being left. When you leave, ensure that dog has something to be distracted by, and I would usually use food. It depends on the dog, of course. Whatever the dog's motivating factors are, I would tend to use that. But I would think that 80+% of the time we would be using food. So let's say you go to work in the morning, rather than to give your dogs breakfast in a bowl free of charge, it's how I feed my dogs, but when you've got a behaviour problem, you can think, well, how can I give the dog this food in a more constructive way? So I would try to get the dog to work for that food. If it was kibble, you can use some devices which you just put the dried food in, and the dog has to work to get the food, because if he's working to get his food rather than worrying about where you are, then in itself we have a solution. Or if it was a food that could be, again, stuffed into like a rubber hollow device, maybe either just given fresh or frozen, and maybe thinking about whether it's 1, 2 or 3 of those devices, that might be useful as well. Recording audio or video as well, so you can get a better insight on the dog's behaviour. Exercise. Now, you clearly have a dog which is high energy. I love Labradoodles. They can be highly energetic, so you know, obviously you have a job to hold down. It's not always that easy if you have to be out of the house early, but you may have to think about the timing of the exercise, and of course also the volume of the exercise. You might want, as another little bullet point heading, to think about whether something like a dog walker would help break the dog's day up in the middle of the day. So usually it's about giving the dog more, because I don't think your dog is as such being naughty. He is just either getting bored or anxious about you not being there. Another element with separation anxiety is, when you are present, how much of your space are you allowing of your time and space. If you are constantly talking to the dog, constantly touching the dog, and allowing him to be with you all of the time, that is not conducive to having a dog which is calm and relaxed when you're not present. So of course we want to love our dogs, of course we want to interact with them, but in some cases of separation anxiety, I find that is a bit supercharged, and that the dog is almost stealing from you that time and energy. So you may have to put in place some limits in terms of what the dog can take from you. That might sound a bit upside down, but I'm absolutely clear that is an element with separation anxiety, that human-dog relationship and how that is set up. But that, you know, in itself is a big subject, and well worthy, or rather worth you exploring that with somebody experienced in the field of separation anxiety. So I hope those little bullet points give you some pointers. You may have success by just implementing a couple of those. If so, fantastic. But if not, seek out an experienced behaviourist.
We've got a question from Al Badette, who says, my 14-month-old Collie Cross refuses to eat out of his bowl. He will never use his nose and feet. He will use his nose and feet to tip the bowl over before eating. What is that about?
Hello, Al. Thank you for your question. Okay, so sometimes a dog can have an aversion to the type of bowl. I have seen some cases where we have just changed the bowl from, let's say, a tin bowl, which, as you can imagine, is quite clunky. You don't say what type of bowl it is, so I'm sorry for making some guesses. But if you maybe change the bowl altogether to something which is solid, quiet and secure, that in itself could help. I think obviously if your dog has some aversion to it, like I was saying earlier, it's about being where you are at the moment, where you'd like to get to. In some respects, I don't mean to minimise the issue, but there could be worse things going on. But naturally, you would want to be able to put a bowl of food down and for your dog to eat out of it gradually. You could sort of stand back from the situation, tick the box of the type of bowl that's being given to the dog to eat out of. So I often like the big earthenware bowls. They're quite heavy, they're quite clunky, but they can last for years if they're not dropped. And dogs often like those because they don't move around when they're eating. I just wonder as well, by the way, if it's a location thing. Have you tried putting the bowl in different locations? That in itself that may help, because it's a case of thinking a bit further afield on the problem. But another thought I had is, if you, for example, knew that your dog really loved little bits of liver or little bits of crispy bacon, then how about just taking, don't overdo it, but just have a little 5-minute session each day where you're just dropping some of those bits. Give the dog a piece first so she knows what's on the menu, and then just drop some in the bowl so we can hopefully erode the problem, because we know there's absolutely no reason why she shouldn't be getting her head in there and enjoying her food, but clearly from her point of view that's not quite the case. So it's a bit of lateral thinking, experimentation. Often I leave customers with things to do which might come under the headings of experimentation, rather than what you need to do to solve this is ABC. It isn't always that easy. So keep trying different things. The bowl itself, the location, the type of food that's going in there, really up it so it's much higher value. And let me know how that goes.
Lucy Todd asks, how do I stop my 10-year-old Labrador Retriever pulling on the lead when he sees a cat or a squirrel?
So this reminds me of virtually the first question that we had today. What breed was it again? Sorry, Steph.
Labrador Retriever.
Labrador. So Labradors are big dogs, and if a Labrador is determined to pull you, there is a good chance that it will pull you. So we need to have, as a first stop point, we need to feel confident that we have some physical control over the dog. So initially we can or could rely upon some equipment, such as a head harness or a body harness. Just be aware that certainly with body harnesses there are two types, either a fixed harness which we just adjust and clip together and it sits on the dog, or there are some anti-pull harnesses which tend to, when the dog pulls, give you the ability to control it by a certain point with some running lines. So it doesn't hurt the dog, but it does give you the ability to control the dog more easily. And I would lean down the road of an anti-pull body harness. You can double that up by using then a double end lead. So one end goes on the body harness, and then you can purchase online leads with a clip on both ends, and so the lead comes up to you and then back down to the dog's neck collar. So that gives you more control. Okay, doesn't really solve the problem, but it does give you more control. Labradors do love their food, so see if you can use that distraction method. You need to be proactive. You need to go out with high value food every time, and with Labradors food, they're a bit like stablemates really. So if you can use food to say, look, don't worry about that, sit, stay, good boy, you're feeding him. You could then potentially, if it was a cat under a car, you could use that food as a lure past the situation. It's not a quick and easy solution, but it's a method where you tick the fact that you have physical control and the fact that you can more successfully lure your dog through the situation by using food. Or again, I hasten to add, could be something like a squeaky toy, whatever motivates your dog.
Fab. So I think we've got time for just one more question.
Hey.
So from Hazel Knight, she says, we have a lurcher who is nearly 5. When my husband is home, she is good as gold, but when it's just her, if she sees someone outside or hears any of the neighbours, she jumps at the window and starts barking. Her husband says it's just the dog protecting her, but she's getting quite upset about it. Is there anything they can do?
So, thank you for that question. This isn't unusual. I am aware that although my own dogs are pretty quiet in the house, and there's, as you know, they're both here around, there's no barking, but when I'm working away and the dogs will be noisier in my absence. And this, I think, is a natural trait of dogs, where they are taking that responsibility to be more guard-like in the absence of one of the couple. So in itself, I'm just trying to say it's not an unusual behaviour. So, and many people might like a little bit of barking, but the ability to say, thank you, that's enough. And I actually quite like that balanced approach, so that we're not saying no barking absolutely at any time, but we're just having some more confidence that we can stop the dog when we want that to happen. But of course, if your wife feels that the barking is too much and it's becoming stressful due to the frequency and the volume, then certainly, as I've already touched on today, if you have an open window and your dog can sit and look out of there and is being reactive to anything and everything that passes, then either simply bring the dog out of that room and block access. In some homes if people tend to spend time in the kitchen and there's a front room, then by simply closing that door, it addresses the problem. But I do realise that not every house is set out in that way. So again, something like opaque window film, it's I use that on a regular basis, or advise it on a regular basis, with good effects. It can really help the dog settle down more. Think about if you have a good on your bed or go to bed command, because if you don't, that is worth working upon. Consider keeping a lead on the dog in the home, so that as and when the dog does that, you are able to hopefully retrieve the situation much more quickly. A lead will allow that you'll have the physical control by lifting the lead and redirecting the dog onto a bed. But what we don't really want to start doing is grabbing dog collars when the dog is already highly charged. So I want you to be able to regain control as calmly as possible. Ask the dog to go onto its bed, to lie down and to stay. You may need to sit there for a couple of minutes and make sure that the dog doesn't rush back to the window. And so you can just begin to get the dog to behave in a way that's more calm, more appropriate for behaviour in the home. Because I agree with you, excessive barking isn't fun, and we need to hit a balance that's right for you. What one owner might find acceptable, another may not. But the point here is that this is your home. The dog needs to fit in with your lifestyle and your rules and ideas about, you know, how much is acceptable. But if you're clear on that, it's just a case really of getting some little tools in place. Dog lead, obscure the view where possible, and to develop that on your bed command, because it gives you a good way to implement an alternative behaviour. As always, we want to reward positive behaviour. So once the dog is on the bed, we can, not overexcitedly, but we just want to be good boy, you stay there. So we're not shouting or being heavy with the dog, but also make sure you're not being like, oh, good boy, he's on his bed, because he will not stay there for long. So you'll need to hit that middle road with getting that behaviour in place, but good luck with that. So I think we're all done. That's a good hour. How enjoyable was that? I hope to see you all again in the near future. So thank you all for being here today. If you could be kind enough please to like and share the post. That helps spread this video to other people. I sometimes get asked when when people are watching it on replay, whether it's live or not. So today is the 16th of February. It's just 1:05 in the afternoon. So thank you all once again for joining in, and I'll look forward to seeing you again soon. Bye for now.